Have you ever found yourself just stuck? Lying in bed, maybe, knowing you have a million things to do, but you just can't summon the energy for any of them? You might call yourself lazy, but deep down, something feels off, right? Well, today we're going to untangle that super common, super confusing feeling. Maybe you're just exhausted all the time. Nothing seems interesting anymore, and that little voice of self-doubt is getting louder and louder. You're probably asking yourself, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just snap out of it? It's a really tough place to be, but believe me, you are not the only one feeling this way. So let's just dive right in. On the surface, yeah, these two can look almost identical. We tend to think of laziness as, just part of someone's personality. But burnout, that's totally different. It's a state of complete and utter exhaustion. And figuring out which is the absolute first step to understanding what's really going on. So what are we even talking about when we say burnout? This isn't just about feeling tired or needing a weekend to recharge. No, this is a deep, bone-deep exhaustion that hits you on every level, emotionally, physically, and mentally. It's what happens when you've been under way too much stress for way too long and your body and mind just run out of gas. And if you're thinking this is some rare thing that only happens to a few people, well, think again. A 2010 U.S. survey found something pretty staggering. 75% of adults have felt the symptoms of burnout. Let that sink in for a second. That's 3 out of every 4 people. This isn't some small problem. It's practically an epidemic. So how do you even begin to figure this out for yourself? Well, the first clue, and honestly maybe the biggest one, isn't about how you feel right now. It's actually hidden in your own past. We have to look at who you were before all of this started. And that's the absolute key right there. The single biggest clue is change. Burnout isn't about who you've always been. It's about a massive shift from the person you know you used to be. Okay, and this is where it gets really clear. Someone who is, let's say, characteristically lazy is pretty consistently unmotivated. That's kind of their default setting. But someone who is burnt out? The irony is they were often the complete opposite. They were the ones who were always on, the high achievers, the people who always gave 110%, right up until the moment they just couldn't anymore. And this really truly gets to the heart of it. The big difference isn't just that you feel tired now, it's that you weren't always this way. This feeling, this lack of motivation, it's a huge departure from your normal self, and that is the real red flag. And this leads to one of the most painful parts of burnout. All those things that used to light you up, your hobbies, your work, your creative projects, suddenly they just feel like another heavy chore. You might even start to resent them because they're all tangled up in the stress that got you here in the first place. So the first clue is that change from your past self. But what about right now? The next clue is all about what's going on inside your own head, that internal emotional battle you might be fighting. Burnout often brings this really weird feeling of disconnection. There's a clinical term for it, depersonalization, but it feels like you're just on autopilot, kind of watching your life from a distance. You might feel emotionally numb, totally detached from yourself, and just overwhelmed by this feeling that nothing you do matters. Another huge internal sign is your mood. You find yourself snapping at people you care about, feeling like your emotions are totally out of your control when that was never you before. That sudden irritability is a classic but often overlooked sign of burnout. And again, just think about the difference. Burnout feels tense, it feels irritable, like a rubber band that's been stretched way too far. And that is a million miles away from how we typically picture laziness, right? Which is all about being relaxed, laid back, totally unbothered. All right, so we've looked at the past and the turmoil on the inside. But burnout doesn't just stay cooped up in your head. Eventually, it starts to spill out. It shows up on the outside in ways that you and probably the people around you can start to see. I mean, when you're that emotionally and physically drained, just taking care of yourself can feel like climbing a mountain. You might stop caring about how you look. Your eating or sleeping habits might get all out of whack. And you might start pulling away from friends because even a simple conversation feels like too much work. And this brings us to a really important point about how this all happens. Burnout is almost never a sudden crash. It's much more like a slow burn, something that creeps up on you so gradually you might not even notice it's happening. You don't just wake up one morning and poof, you're burnt out. It just doesn't work that way. It creeps in. The loss of motivation, that feeling of detachment, the self-neglect, all of these things build up slowly, over time, through very distinct stages. Researchers have actually mapped this out into 5 stages. And ironically, it often starts with what they call the honeymoon phase. You're excited, you're diving into something new with tons of energy. But then comes stage 2, the onset of stress, where you start having more and more bad days. That can easily slide into chronic stress, where feeling exhausted is just your new normal. After that, you hit stage 4, full-on burnout. And if it's not dealt with, it can become habitual burnout, where this depleted state becomes your entire life. And here's the scary part. The warning signs, like losing your optimism, can show up as early as stage 2.
Okay, so we've looked at the clues, the change from your past, the feelings inside, the behaviors on the outside. After all of that, what's the big takeaway? What's the one thing you really need to remember?
This is it. The most important thing to get is that writing off burnout as just laziness is a dangerous trap. Seriously. Because when you call it laziness, you're telling yourself it's a character flaw. You pile on guilt and shame, which only makes you feel worse, and it stops you from finding a real solution.
So let's just sum this all up. Burnout is a serious medical condition. It is not a flaw in your personality. It is a state of total exhaustion, not a choice you are making. And that's exactly why spotting these signs early on is so important, because it's what makes recovery possible. And that brings us to our final question. Just recognizing these signs, just giving a name to what you're feeling, is a huge first step. The next one is about being kind to yourself. So, with everything we've talked about in mind, what is one small step, one tiny thing you can do today for yourself?